Hey there, and welcome back to Rimworld. My name is Pete, and today we complete episode 2 of our third Rimworld series. I'm actually not quite sure what I want to call it yet, but perhaps you have some good ideas. In any case, before we jump in today, as a beautiful aurora gets the episode off to a good start, let me quickly announce the winners of the Rimworld Ideology giveaway that we had in the last episode, which received over 4,000 comments in 1 week. 3 names were randomly selected, and I am very happy to congratulate Daniel Rutledge, Francois Pellet, and the Alex Hoppy. I would like to ask all 3 of you to get in touch with me via email to pete@petecomplete.com, and we'll sort things out from there. To everyone else, thank you very much for your fantastic feedback on the first episode, and don't be too sad that you did not get lucky this time. I am pretty sure this won't be the last giveaway on the channel. Now, with that being said, let's get to it. Our bloodlusty psychopath Spectral Phoenix has spent the night in her makeshift cabin, and on the next morning it's time to construct a darklight torch. This new torch variant added by the Ideology expansion offers us several advantages over the campfire, as it consumes far less wood, even less than a regular torch, but still gives off enough heat and light to work in this rather cramped environment. And since we are not cooking at the moment anyway, this seems like a much more sensible way to keep things cozy. Because Specs' cooking skill is so low, it is actually better to consume raw food for the time being, and that ranges from tasty berries to perhaps not so tasty raw meat. Before we go hunting though, let's finally take care of the Gowranland tree. Last time, a Gowranland pod sprouted on the map. Opening it reveals a Gowranland seed, and we can now plant that right next to the anima tree to grow a Gowranland tree. Doing so gives us our first development point, as Gowranland trees are central to the tree connection meme that forms the heart of our ideology, the Cult of Jinx. Development points can be earned in a variety of ways, but mostly through rituals, and we need 10 in total to be able to reform our ideology, which then allows us to select more memes and precepts and make other changes. Now, speaking of rituals, we can actually start one right here and now, as the Gowranland tree itself is more or less useless without someone connected to it. And since we don't exactly have much of a population to choose from, Specs now has to perform the ritual all by herself. On the right you can see that with more people in the colony the ritual quality would improve, but even with poor quality, forming a connection with the tree is guaranteed. The only thing that will likely be worse is how strong the connection is at the beginning. And there we are, Specs is now connected to this Gowranland tree, a connection that can, by the way, never be changed. Not only does she now receive a small permanent mood bonus from this, but we now also have the ability to grow dryads. Depending on the strength of Specs' tree connection, the Gowranland tree can support up to 4 of these little creatures. However, maintaining the necessary connection strength can be quite time-consuming. For that reason, we are setting our target strength to only 25% here in the beginning. This will still require a little over 3 hours of pruning work per day, but it will be enough to support 2 dryads. The only thing we still need to set now is what kind of dryad we want this tree to produce, as there are a total of 7 different kinds to choose from. I will not go over all of them at this point. Some are useful in a fight, others provide some utility like food and medicine production or hauling, but we are going with the Woodmaker dryad. As you have seen in the last episode, chopping wood is not exactly beneficial to Specs' well-being, but on a map with little other natural resources to speak of, and with the stone-cutting research still locked, likely for quite some time, this is going to be a sensible alternative. Every 2 days, a Woodmaker dryad produces 25 wood, not a crazy amount by any means, but with 2 of them, hopefully enough to make a bit of progress without harming the nature around us. Now at this point, Specs can bring in her very first rice harvest. Alongside the berries and the occasional animal, this small field here should be enough to keep her fed and to build a small stockpile for the winter. As she brings the rice into her shelter, we also receive our first quest of the episode, and this one promises us another colonist, at least for 20 days. If we take in this refugee, she will stay with us for that long, and if we keep her happy, she might even join us for good. And well, if she doesn't, we can still make her change her mind. After all, it says very specifically here that she's not part of any faction. Before we invite her in though, let's take care of a bit more work around the map, including a dead turkey that has apparently been killed by one of the other wild animals. Very fitting for the post-Thanksgiving episode, I think, and with Specs returning to her base to prepare a meal, let us now grow our colony. We are now joined by another female colonist, and the first thing we want to do is to give her a new name, as always chosen from the list of patrons in the naming rights tier and above. And so, please welcome Thoraya to our colony, and from what we can see here, she might prove to be extremely useful. Not only does she have a major passion for plant work and should therefore fit right in with Specs, she is also a competent melee fighter fueled by the bloodlust trait. Her psychic hypersensitivity could also make her a good psycaster, although I think she is not considered a tribalist, so I'm not entirely sure if we can give her psychic abilities through the anima tree. Interestingly enough, she is also a nudist, something that might become an issue as the nights get colder again during winter, although being on borrowed time so to speak, we can't change most of her outfit anyway, as most of her equipment slots are locked for the next 20 days. Injury-wise, Thoraya is looking pretty good. A stab scar on her shoulder is reducing her work speed a bit, but all in all I think we are looking at a promising new addition to our colony. Finally then, a look at her ideology, because we are obviously not the only ones who have one, and this might actually be both very fitting and potentially troubling at the same time. I am mainly talking about the nature primacy meme, which on one hand synergizes very well with the no tree cutting approach of the Cult of Jinx, but unfortunately goes even further, also demanding that no animals are killed or butchered and that no stones are mined. So basically, Thoraya here is against more or less everything that could give us some resources in the early game, which has the chance to become a problem, as we simply don't have the option to stay away from all of that, and especially hunting will be essential over the next few days, as Specs is still running around naked, except for that war mask. So we probably want to convert Thoraya over to the Cult of Jinx as soon as possible. For the time being though, let's make her a part of the colony in the first place. And by doing so, we now also have to choose a name for our faction and our settlement. I don't quite understand why the game still forces us to separate both, as multi-settlement player factions are not really a viable thing in vanilla Rimworld, and since ideology is now also factored in, I don't think we need to make this even more complicated than it already is, so for our faction name we are also going with the Cult of Jinx. For the settlement, however, I once again chose a name from my Patreon supporters, and I think Livienna has a nice ring to it. Shortly after then, we are introduced to yet another new ideology feature, as we are informed that there is a logging worksite nearby. Taking a look at the world map, we can see that it is in fact pretty close to our base, marked in light blue here, and since it is only guarded by 2 people and holds over 300 units of wood, we might be stopping by there sooner or later. For the moment though, we can watch as both Specs and Thoraya spend their evenings meditating. I have checked, Thoraya does not actually gain anything from the anima tree as she does not have the natural meditation focus, but she does still gain some recreation this way, and it also forces the 2 of them to spend some time together, which might help their opinion of each other, or at least Thoraya's opinion of Specs, as Specs herself doesn't really do the whole social thing, thanks to her psychopath trait. And speaking of opinion, disregarding Thoraya's opinion and mood loss, we are now using the night to go hunting, as a raccoon is sleeping nearby and the ambush at night allows us to get at least 1 guaranteed hit. You can also see here that Thoraya's opinion of Specs has immediately been reduced by 15 points, and this will increase further the more animals we kill. Thoraya's mood has also taken a small -4 penalty, and again that will also grow larger the more hunting we do. Now on the next morning, Thoraya has planted a bit more rice and dropped her pants, as that is the only clothing item that she can actually get rid of. Unfortunately though, this still does not satisfy her nudism trait, but the pants were also considered tattered apparel, so now we at least got rid of that. Now Thoraya's first task here in the colony of Livienna is to build up a food supply. Winter is actually not too far off in the distance, and despite the fact that we technically have plenty of growing space, our colonists' reluctance to chop down trees does make growing crops quite a bit more difficult. We are also using this opportunity to collect a bit more medicine, because that first raid is coming sooner or later, especially now that we have 2 colonists instead of 1. Specs, meanwhile, has apparently taken a liking to Thoraya's old pants, and honestly, being completely naked while pruning a tree for several hours is probably not the best idea in the first place. Still, I would really like to give her something a bit more functional soon. Specs' Gauranlin tree pruning speed, by the way, is completely dependent on her plant skill, which in turn is also increased by pruning, and she also gets a 25% speed bonus from the tree connection meme of the Cult of Jinx. So in hindsight, going purely off of the skill, it probably would have been better to connect Thoraya to the tree, but like I said, changing the connection now is no longer possible, which could potentially also result in a problem if Thoraya is in fact leaving us after 20 days, because as far as I know, even in that case, Specs cannot take over the tree. So all things considered, it's probably better to have her do it in the first place. Now, on the next morning, we are deconstructing some granite columns right next to our 2 trees, because Specs and Thoraya have now spent 2 nights straight in the same room, and with both of their moods already being somewhat fragile, I think it's a good idea to build a second bedroom. With enough granite collected for now, we should also start working on a second rice field to keep Thoraya well fed. And the good thing about her nature primacy meme is the fact that she will automatically avoid cutting down trees for this and only sow out plants when no trees are in the way. Specs meanwhile continues the hunt. Another turkey is her target now, but, and this is actually pretty crucial, we do not want to kill it yet. Instead, as she now moves on to what is probably the extended family of Fatty McCool, we only want to do enough damage so that the animal bleeds out and dies on its own. That avoids the mood and relationship penalties from killing animals and should keep Thoraya at least somewhat happy. One big downside of this is of course that downed or dead animals are a welcome sight for predators, so we need to be quick if we want to make the most of our kills. And that is how Specs spends most of her day, unfortunately neglecting her work on the Goranlin tree somewhat, but I think we can handle that. Thoraya, meanwhile, has now finished the construction of our second room, and so the 2 of them can now sleep separated. Our first turkey has also gone down already, and a short while later, Specs delivers the corpse of another boar. A round of meditation finishes the day, and we rejoin our colonists on the next morning, as it is time to gather some more steel, and to perhaps also hunt another turkey in the process. We are aiming for 75 units worth of steel here, but of course a little more surely can't hurt, because we want to construct ourselves a butcher table. With hunting now a regular activity and with just enough wood left over to construct one, a proper butcher table is absolutely essential to increase our meat and leather yield, which in turn brings us one step closer to that first piece of tribalware. Unfortunately, we don't have any more dead animals to use at the moment. I think one of the boars Specs had injured did actually get eaten last night, but we can always hunt more. Specs can definitely use the shooting experience. At night then, we have our first cargo pod drop of the series, and it could not be a better one for our young colony. 10 packaged survival meals are a great emergency stock to have, especially with winter getting closer. On the next morning then, the cold bog is wrapped in a thick fog as Thoraya brings the meals into safety and Specs butchers another turkey. At this point we have 40 units of bird skin, enough to make a proper bedroll, but I think some tribalware is a bit more important to at least have a minimum of protection on Specs. Another turkey roaming around near the ancient danger is therefore a welcome sight, and after enough damage has been done, Specs even finds a third one near the edge of the map. In the meantime, Thoraya has collected more steel and we can even rescue a table from the ruins, so that is another small mood penalty for Thoraya potentially removed in the future. Specs herself thankfully does not care where she eats. Before it's time to go to bed, Thoraya makes one last trip halfway across the map to bring home a precious boar. For some reason, hauling dead animals is something that she has no issues with. With the animal butchered, we unfortunately don't quite have the 60 units of pigskin required for Specs' first outfit, so it remains a tight race between turkey and boar over who gets to be the first clothing item. Since our first raid has also still surprisingly not happened yet, it might be wise to invest in some defenses, and with the recent steel influx we have enough materials here to build 2 deadfall traps. That is, if Thoraya didn't botch the second one, and things get worse from here. Right now you can see Thoraya make the foolish attempt of converting Specs to her ideology, and our bloodlusty psychopath does not appreciate that one bit. So a nasty fistfight is on. Both participants are mostly unprotected and fairly even in their abilities, although Specs has a slight edge when it comes to her melee combat skills. So let's watch this one and see who comes out on top. And indeed, it is Specs who emerges victorious, setting a clear example that you don't question the cult of Jinx, and especially not Spectral Phoenix herself. Still, both colonists did take away their fair share of cracks and bruises, and so for the next few hours, Specs is mostly occupied tending to her wounds, while Thoraya is left outside the door, bloody and unable to move. By the way, unfortunately, neither one of the two actually received a mood bonus from their bloodlust traits for this fight. In order for that to happen, we do in fact need to get some kills. In the evening then, Specs finally shows mercy and takes care of Thoraya's wounds as well. It looks like she does not harbor any hard feelings, or any feelings at all for that matter. Needless to say, it is a rather restless and overall uneventful night for the two of them, but on the next morning we have a visitor. Just a single traps person with a few items to sell, likely nothing too crazy though this early in the game. While they make their way over to us, Specs and Thoraya continue with business as usual, albeit a little slowed down, but at this stage we simply cannot afford to have both of them rest until their injuries are fully healed, especially since Specs' connection strength to the Goranland tree has also suffered a bit over the last few days due to all of the hunting. As the lone trader then arrives at our shelter, Thoraya engages in the conversation. Her social skill is a little bit higher than Specs', but in the grand scheme of things that doesn't really matter, as we can only sell our small pile of knives and unwanted equipment. We receive a whopping 19 silver for that, one more a little later as Specs also sells Thoraya's old pants, because we finally have enough materials for that first piece of travelware. We also receive a wooden mask as a gift from the trader as they prepare to leave again, and will let them. Even the bloodlustiest colonist should know that now is not the time to fight, as both Specs and Thoraya are still hurting from last night's tussle. Our very first birdskin travelware meanwhile is completed as a for now meaningless solar flare strikes the base, and it is a complete success. Normal quality is probably the best we could have hoped for considering the circumstances and Thoraya's crafting skill of 3, so let's give Specs her first proper outfit. For the coldest days of winter we will probably need a bit more than this, and I am hoping for that first raid to supply us with something a little bit warmer, but for that to happen we would need to get a raid in the first place, and it seems like Randy is taking his sweet time with that. And so, as Specs and Thoraya wander off into their respective bedrooms, Specs is now occupying the one that is a bit cleaner. I think she has beaten that privilege out of Thoraya. All in all, it was still a lot of work setting things up here today, so in these first few episodes we will likely not rush through in-game week after in-game week too quickly, as I also want to give you a chance to get acquainted with this new colony and its inhabitants, and having a second colonist in our ranks by episode 2 is already a new record, even if it's only for 20 days, of which about 14 still remain at this point. But again, we have ways to make her a guaranteed addition if we really want to. She obviously won't like them, but I feel like Specs would not be the type of person to be overly concerned with other people's feelings. So we'll see how this story continues, and by the way, if you have other ideas for the faction name, then please let me know in the comments. We can always use dev mode to change that. For things like this, I do not consider that a violation of the rules for this playthrough. As we wrap things up for today, I also once again have some lovely fan art to share with you, this time coming from Dr. Rove, with a lovely rendition of Specs with her mask and knife. Thank you very much for this one. I just love to see how these series bring out so much amazing artwork, and I can't wait to see what else we have in store over the next few weeks. With that being said, let's make the cut now, and as always, if you have enjoyed the episode, then I would be very happy if you could leave a thumbs up. If you like what I'm doing and want to support me and my channel further, then you can subscribe to stay up to date, grab some merch over on shop.petecomplete.com, or check out and maybe even pledge to the Pete Complete Patreon to perhaps get your name into this series as well. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.